Villain ASMR. Alrighty. Well, thank you for watching the stream about my post-apocalypse project. The biggest part of this stream is just going to be me going through the overarching what I've got about it so far. And then future streams will revolve around um, specific parts of the system. Please let me know if the music is too loud. Um, and in the future streams, the different parts will include going through and detailing out a class's move list and um, determining some dice math um, and how we want our stat spreads to work in this game, which I think I want it to be a little bit more punishing than normal Powered by the Apocalypse games, which is what this system is built off of. Powered by the Apocalypse is a very unrestrictive system. It gives you enough cohesiveness to be able to move things forward, and I built what I have so far following a checklist um, for the PDF called Simple World, which lets you easily and quickly come up with a Powered by the Apocalypse engine game. So we're going to start out with our stats to represent reflexes and gracefulness. We're going to have coordination for persuasiveness and assertiveness, personality, aggressive and forcefulness, vehemence, calculating and how methodological you are, shrewdness, for inquisitiveness and how exploratory you are, curiosity. And these right here are the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stats that Simple World asks you to come up with. I had those 5 stats, and I thought those don't represent the total characteristics of a character that I want to be able to ask players to roll with, and so I added on from a little bit more of a standard RPG block line, representing toughness and solidity is your resilience, and your morale and spirit is your resolve. Because I want to be working with a not just how aggressive are you, not how persuasive or assertive you are, not just how curious you are. There are also going to be challenges in this world that can only be, I won't say only, but that will very often ask you to um, check how resilient your character's body is and your will is.
Do you want to learn how to draw amazing
Oh
art?
no.
Would you like to learn
Commercials. Bleh. I just have the Last of Us soundtrack looping in the background. I'm not monetizing this, so it's no big deal. Um, so then agendas. These um, these are, I won't say guiding principles that we talked about with the previous stream, but these are similar to those, where this is whenever I am thinking up what's happening, and why we're playing. Um, these are the things that should be happening. The first is make the player characters' lives not boring. Because if it's boring, why are we all sitting here playing? Sometimes low key, uh, low key. Let's see. There are times when a break in action or drama is a good thing, but that's completely separate from boring. Because you can have a break in action and drama as a reward almost for going through a bunch of action and drama, and that follows the, kind of hills and valleys of capturing an audience in a role playing game. Because if you are all high octane all the time, it eventually the stress of that eventually wears on a group of players. The next is play to find out what happens. So we should never, when thinking about how we want to structure the game and abilities and creating content for our players at the table, we don't want to be, puppet stringing literally everything. That's usually called railroading and is received very poorly. Um, Powered by the Apocalypse games have a wild propensity for going crazily out of control, because of this rule of play to find out what happens. Most skills and abilities, and we have Master of Ceremony rules that will go, or moves that will go through, that will really, um, that are very much so not the more static things a DM can do in Dungeons and Dragons or games like that. They're very much made to be a yes and drive something forward, to find out, like, okay, how does this change things, and what do you do because this changed things. And the last is play because it's fun, not out of obligation. Um, I've been in a few games of Dungeons and Dragons, um, and a few other games. You can think of like BattleTech or um, like a board game night, stuff like that, where um, this happened a lot in high school because the idea was any game night was better than no game night. Well, it turns out that's not really the case. There's certainly a very big distinction between we're playing because we're having fun and we're playing out of obligation, trying to mill fun out of it like we're all Conan on the wheel of pain. Um, so we want to structure the game to help make fun, a certain type of fun, but fun nonetheless, and not not have a game where everyone needs to show up like every week because it's what we do. Some people are like that, and that works for them. Um, I oftentimes skip around in the video games I play because if something becomes to feel like an obligation or routine for me, I stop having fun with it. And then I'll come back a couple months later and finish it up. I've been slowly making my way through the original Doom and Doom 2 games this way. And it's just, I play it, I have fun, and then I go and I do something else. So we want to make the game so that playing when it's fun and not out of obligation doesn't hurt your ability to tell a story with it. Because that's ultimately what what RPGs are about. We're telling stories with each other in ways that challenge our characters and sometimes ourselves. So principles. These are the things that whenever I'm embellishing the world or talking to the players, these are the things that I want to be thinking about consistently. Um, Sprinkle evocative details everywhere. So, you don't just come into a room, you come into a fairly sizable dining room. It has a table that one leg has rotted through and caused the table to tip slightly. You can see in the corner that there was a buffet that has long since tarnished and is no longer. The varnish has worn off through the years of neglect. You know, we're gonna we're just gonna think through the environment and make sure that we tell players about the environment. We don't want to tell them too much. We don't want to have a sensory overload, but we want to paint a picture like Bob Ross. Give everyone a happy little tree and a happy little friend. And the sprinkle evocative details everywhere really plays into make the world seem real. Now there's a few different ways that this game system will do that, partially through the idea of fronts and portfolios, and uh, these things help the factions that exist in the world and the places that exist in the world have more depth to seem real. But we never, unless it's a specific aspect of the place that the characters are in, we never want to make the world seem fake or constructed. This one, build a bigger world through play. So this really ties in to the mechanics of how this game system works. Is oftentimes a character will roll a move, and should they succeed at a certain level of on the roll, the move might say, you get to name off something that has happened in this place that is a historical noteworthy event. So the player can think and go, all right, well, at this place there was a battle for, what is this place? This place is a ore smelting facility. There was a battle here between two factions for control of this ore smelting facility, and then as a group, as a master of ceremonies and a player, you're not sitting down and just thinking, hey, wouldn't it be cool if there was an ore refining facility over there, or smelting facility that two groups fought over. Now you're, through play, discovering and deepening the world. This happens a lot. I think this will happen the most in this type of game with um, people trying to figure out what was the apocalypse, so to say. The next is create interesting dilemmas, not interesting plots. Um, this really works into um, uh, uh, the agenda up here. Make the player's characters' lives not boring. Um, to create plots, yes, you can create plots, but plots involve that regardless of whether or not the players can do anything, there is a plot happening. That stuff is in the background. That's not really what the players deal with. The players can deal with interrupting a plot, or they can deal with the fallout from plots, but plot is something a book has. Moment to moment gameplay in a, or maybe not even moment to moment, but session to session gameplay in an RPG should be more about dealing with a dilemma, dealing with a problem that has cropped up. Plots can become problems, but plots aren't in and of themselves the solution to creating problems. So this might be, if it's interesting enough, it might be that while the group was away investigating a side of town that they've never been to before, somebody came and raided them. Almost like if you've ever played the game Rust or another um, multiplayer survival game, you might know about this. People will raid you when you're offline. They'll specifically wait for you and your friends to log off for the night. Your stuff is still persistent in the world. Most of the times your characters are there. They'll rob you naked, they'll take all your stuff, and then they'll blow it up. Well, the equivalent of that in here, which, maybe you want to blow it up, maybe you don't, maybe you want to take everything, maybe you don't, is while they're away doing something else, they get back to, oh crap. And you don't necessarily even have to spring this on them on an adventure. They can go, okay, well, we want to, in our downtime, kind of individually go out and explore this area. And you can go, okay, you guys all have gone out and done your things. When you come back, there wasn't enough people to keep eyes all over your base. Now you have stuff missing. And believe me when I say one of the quickest ways to piss off players and get them motivated to do something is take their stuff. They do not like it. Okay, so the next one is address yourself to the characters, not the players. I've started doing this in my Dungeons and Dragons games, and I've noticed an increase in participation, and also an increase in grabbing someone's attention. If there's a lot of table talk, or if they've spent way too much time thinking about doing something and don't even realize it's their turn, saying their character's name oftentimes is more effective than saying their name. Because suddenly they're like, oh crap, no, that's my character, that's my pawn piece in this world. I don't, what happened to them? Kind of deal. It also, I've noticed, while maybe not completely, having people go straight into in-character role-playing, addressing yourself to the characters and not the players also gets them thinking from the character's perspective. Next is look at your NPCs and ideas through crosshairs. This is a big one of nothing that we as MCs, nothing that we as MCs create should be above player player influence. It might be hard to influence in a broad term as well. Kill, steal from, you should never. This also goes back into make the world seem real. There are places where it's hard to steal from people. There aren't places where it's impossible to steal from people. Even stealing from Fort Knox is probably technically possible, but in execution is incredibly difficult. Almost impossible difficult, but not completely impossible. Now, there could be places like that in your world, but at the same time, if your players aren't engaging with your NPCs or ideas that you're throwing out there, just drop them. Just push them into the ditch with the others. There's no real need for you to inherently try and just dog the players with something. If they're not paying attention to an important faction or location or idea that's developing in your world, it will eventually come back to bite them via the use of fronts and portfolios, which are effectively the same thing. They're just called something different between the different Powered by the Apocalypse games. So yeah, your NPCs, your ideas, they're not invincible. We need to not think of them as such. They're all fallible. Name everyone and make everyone human. This is something that can often be hard to follow up on. It's easy to go in the spot. Oh yeah, this is Jimmy. He's a traitor. Here's Jimmy's crazy accent. But this just reinforces make the world seem real. Try, if you have to make an NPC on the spot, write down the NPC's name, and kind of what you gave them, and then try and think of reasons for why they would be there. We shouldn't be making. We need to be putting enough forethought into an area ahead of time that we can reasonably understand why the people that would be in this area or part of these factions would want from this area, why they would be there, and what they personally might be, how they personally might feel about these situations that they're put in to encounter the player characters. Ask provocative questions and build on the answers. This ties back into build a bigger world through play. So try not to ask questions that are relative, that don't have a lot of narrative weight. And even some innocuous questions might reveal something about a character if you build on it. So, you might have a character. One thing that I would like to do with this game is introduce the idea of perishable rations and non-perishable rations. So most players will think to themselves, hey, we have perishable rations, they'll eventually go bad, we need to get rid of those, like, we need to go through those first. But what if one player character, just because they have grown to enjoy the taste of, heavily processed um, and preserved foods. I don't know why you would, but there are crazy people out there that enjoy eating almost nothing but MREs on the internet. So, you know, there's something for everybody out there. What if that character prefers to eat, you know, perishable or non-perishable food first? How do the other characters feel about this? What does this say about their character? Is there something that we can build off of this with? Any questions that you ask, always try and build off the answers. And what I also take from ask provocative questions is ask hard questions. This is a game about survival, a post-apocalypse survival game, because most people don't really understand the idea that normal Dungeons and Dragons and most fantasy worlds are actually already post-apocalypse worlds. Um, they just went through something that wasn't called an apocalypse. It's functionally an apocalypse. You're living in a time with fallen great empires from long ago that were more advanced than you are now. So you're finding ruins everywhere. So you're, going into these crypts and um, dungeons and pulling out great rewards and wealth. Um, so what we want to do with asking the hard questions in a survival game might be, what are you willing to do to secure food for yourself? How far are you willing to go? Are you willing to harm children? Are you willing to harm innocents? Stuff like that. And it might be that it comes up in play. And that's kind of the fun of a survival game, is finding your character and then watching them twist in the wind as they make terrible decisions, because those terrible decisions ensure that they can continue to live. Let's see. Respond with challenging circumstances and occasional rewards. Now, I would like to add a little bit of nuance to this, just because of how this game works, the system works. We don't need to constantly give them more ammo, more medical supplies, more food. Um, this is a era um, without automation for the most part. So you're not going to replenish them as quickly as you would in modern times. And you also ammo works differently empowered by the apocalypse. Most of the time, ammo has maybe like 1 to 5 uses, and when you roll poorly, you might lose an ammo count. You might have to choose to deal damage but mark off an ammo. You might lose an additional ammo if it's a particularly poor roll. Or you might, if you roll well enough, or choose a different kind of penalty for not rolling well as a player, you might not spend ammo at all. So ammo count isn't necessarily something that needs to be constantly tracked. It's a little bit more of an abstraction of the idea of an ammo stockpile, and not necessarily I have 5 bullets. You know, you have five. It would basically equate to 5 screw-ups. So I would like to nuance this rewards bit with little rewards at first are going to be, you know, items that don't necessarily have an immediate thoughtful use for them. Like, oh yeah, you guys raid a part of town you've never been to, you crack open a fashion shop, and here's a bunch of clothes. Like, what do you want to do with the clothes? Like, they might think of something to do with the clothes. They might turn them into, you know, they might be able to turn them into bandages, or they might cart them all off to try and sell to, you know, passing traders or something like that. But they're not immediately useful things, and that's what I would probably refer to as like a little reward. A reward with a little R versus reward with a big R is going to be like rations, you know, perishable, non-perishable food, ammo, weapons, armor, technology, stuff like that. Those would be rewards with a big R. So I think the nuance here that I've been trying to get to for the rewards is that throughout each tier of play, we need to keep an eye on what the little R rewards would be and what the big R rewards would be, and tie those into how challenging of circumstances are they. We don't always want to give them a reward, because oftentimes a reward might just be that they got experience, and that's just a natural circumstance of play. Whereas with the like material rewards, you might go to a place held by your enemies thinking that they have a huge stockpile, but you might turn up there and, oh, they don't actually have a stockpile. So it's an important thing to just kind of keep in mind. We want to have nuance in proportion to tier and challenge of circumstance in our rewards. This one I think also requires a little bit of nuance. Be a fan of the player's characters. I think here the biggest thing to keep in mind with be a fan of the player's characters is grow to enjoy watching the player's characters exist and live in this world, but don't forget that this is a harsh world and to punish them accordingly. Because being too soft, especially in a survival campaign, being too soft on players is just going to completely ruin the idea of the survival aspect. It's just going to become another, you know, it's going to become D&D with with duct tape together Kalashnikovs and everyone wearing Mad Max gear. And that's not what we want. We want to have some real stakes to it. Think off-screen too. What this says to me is that we need to think about not just what's happening in the immediate scene, but how the immediate scene might affect somebody else, or how previous scenes that we've gone through have affected the other factions at play in this area, in this world, in this universe. So just always try and keep an idea of how the immediate affects the greater world. Here's one of my favorites. The more that you do this, the better responses you will get from your players. Sometimes reflect a question back upon the players. So in Dungeon World, there is a class called the Bard. And one of the things the Bard can do is when they show up to a new place, they can roll something or they can roll to recall if they know anything about the place that they are in. And the DM will tell them something about the place they're in if they rolled well enough. So the big thing that our Dungeon World DM often does is he'll flip the question back onto the character and say, well, you know that there is this type of thing. What important aspect of what important event or person or cultural icon of this place would you have known about, have heard about, and found interesting enough to keep? This works the best. Reflecting questions back upon the players works the best when a question has been asked about a piece of the world's setting that doesn't have an answer. Or it might have an official answer by you, but no one knows it. So it might be best to flip the question back on the players and get all of their ideas so that you can take in what they think, and you can choose from or mix the best ideas that you're getting. And you can also use this to plant hints that, like, oh, maybe it is actually this one, and then they find out later, like, no, it's actually this was the answer. And you can see how you were almost on the right track, but then we loop the answer back in, and you kind of let them think, oh yeah, zombies are created magically in this universe, or something. Like, zombies in this universe don't spread zombieism. Something like that. This is something that I added. These last two, I believe, are ones that, up to this point, these have been things I've picked off a list. And I picked them off the list because I thought they were useful to have, and to remind myself of. The last two are more about, they're kind of the same thing, but they're specifically for mood and atmospheric setting. And these two will tie back into the rewards. Because it's balance, hope that the world can be saved, and despair at its decay. So I think the way that we do this the best is that we set it to the point that there are some characters around who still remember the world as it was. They're getting older, and we're starting to get people coming into young adulthood or full-on adulthood that have grown up in this world and have either briefly glimpsed the previous world before the fall, or have only heard tales of it. And this is a hard thing for, psychologically, for a population to go through. A collective despair at the state of the world wrecks the psychology of a population, the psyche of a population. But we want to have just enough hope that we can survive and live through this world, and come out the other end of it back where we were or progressed further, than despair at the spiral and decay that we're looking at. Yeah, so this is going to be a tough one, and this is going to be something that the longer you do this, or if you have a lot of writing experience with fiction, you're probably going to be better at it than I am just starting out. But the more that we play this, and the more that we get better at balancing hope and despair, the better off the atmosphere of the world will be, and the better you'll be at balancing it. There is a idea that I had, but I completely just left my mind. So, and the last one is emphasize how difficult it is to survive in the world. You earn what you have, and someone always wants it. This kind of ties back into the idea I talked about earlier regarding the dilemmas versus plots. We want to... A dilemma is that someone has seen you and your group pulling in salvage and wants it. The plot is them attempting to get the salvage. And the actual attempt at getting the salvage, that's the dilemma. That's another dilemma along the plot. So I guess the thing that we can take away from dilemmas versus plots and how to wrap it around into here is dilemmas are the individual problems that arise from plots. But you don't need plots to have dilemmas. So we just want to show, they might come across Jimmy the Traitor. Alright, and for the first, 4 or 5 months of in-game time, or depending on how often your group meets, the first 5 to 10 sessions that your group meets, because if you meet once a month, you're obviously going to progress story-wise much faster and become much more familiar much more rapidly with your characters than a group that plays once a month or twice a month. So we always have to remember to scale it. But they might meet Jimmy the Traitor, and Jimmy the Traitor comes in, he gives them fair deals because everyone knows Jimmy the Traitor has a good reputation. He doesn't try and screw you because he knows everyone in this world tries their hardest to survive. But at some point, Jimmy the Traitor doesn't show up. That kind of prompts them maybe to go looking for Jimmy the Traitor, and then they find out, or maybe they don't, and they're caught up in their own stuff and completely miss that Jimmy the Traitor always shows up on the, you know, second Wednesday of the month or whatever. And they might have just completely missed it, and then find out later through other means that, oh crap, somebody killed Jimmy because they didn't have enough and they thought he was screwing them over, or they didn't have enough themselves, and they saw that Jimmy did, so somehow they got through his defenses, somehow they got to him and killed him to take his stuff. I think that's not the only way that we can emphasize how hard it is to survive in this world. One of the things that we'll get into eventually when we form, I think, the list of like player moves and like full tracking statistics, like harm that you can tell, your harm, your HP, your morale bonus, your sanity, those things. When we get into designing those, is when we can really help emphasize the harshness of the world. Because, you know, it's post-apocalypse. We're going to have a little bit of fun when we design the world with creating weird, freaky monsters. Because who doesn't want weird, freaky monsters in a world like this? I guess that's also part of the fun. And that can be a way to emphasize how difficult it is to survive in the world. A lot of RPGs have animals as low-level mooks, because eventually you graduate to demons and angels and golems and dragons. In the real world, you never move past the realm of animals. So it could be that in this new world, meeting a predator is a bigger deal than in the modern world. You may not have the resources to drive them off. You may not have the resources to shoot them down and defeat them, you know. Or you might not have the resources to deal with the particular way that they are a predator. You know, poison, strangulation, stuff like that. And then we're going to get into MC moves. And these are things that when the player characters roll poorly enough, or there's a narrative instance for the MC to pull a move, then this is the time that we're going to use these. I mean, it also sometimes certain moves will tell you, like character moves will tell you as the MC, this is the type of move you should make in response to this. The first one is separate them. I think this could end up being a potentially extremely effective one in this type of game, because I'm hoping for stats being much lower powered than in standard powered by the Apocalypse games. And we'll get into why I want that when we get into trust and / relationship down here. Second, put them together. You know, pull them apart, challenge them individually or in small groups, or you can bring them back together so that it doesn't feel unfair and unfun when you pull out a bigger move. put someone in a high stakes situation. This can be done politically, this can be done like physically with their characters, emotionally, you know, kill. Maybe going back to Jimmy the Traitor that we were talking about earlier, maybe a character in the party really liked Jimmy. Maybe there was like a character that flirted with Jimmy all the time. How do they take finding out Jimmy's dead? You know, that's putting them in a high stakes situation because what that character is going to want to do, and is probably willing to fight for, is different than what the other characters might be willing to do. Next, trade harm for harm as established. The as established bit here is just because we haven't gone through and determined the number scale for harm, hit points, damage, stuff like that. So when appropriate, you didn't roll well enough to attack the creature and get away from it before it can hit you. Stuff like that. You dealt damage to the reactor, but unfortunately, a Tesla coil spark like flies off of it and smacks you for some damage. You weren't grounded. Next is just deal harm as established. Again, just someone does something stupid, someone doesn't roll well enough, just deal damage. Announce off-screen badness. This is a move that can be used to... It's a little bit different than the one below it, but this is a move that we can use to give them basically a heads up that there is another faction or another group or interest point. I use that term loosely. Could be enemies, could be zombie swarm, could be whatever we come up with here. Coming around off screen, somewhere close by. Next is announce future badness. This is going to be your foreshadowing. This is going to be your this can be a thing where you roll up into town. Maybe it's a little bit more of a westernish based adventure that they're currently on. They roll up into town. The local sheriff or the local, preacher or whatever is up on the gallows that serves as the center of the town and is whipping up the crowd into a frenzy, or is speaking about things that could turn over onto the players. Next is take away one of their things. Real simple. When you take away player stuff, they want it back. They get pissed. They go after it. Or they try and find a way to have retribution or revenge in some fashion. Or figure out why their thing is gone. Because it could be that when we get into the classes down here, the Madman. Maybe the Madman has a move where the winds of the apocalypse talk to him about things that are happening, and the winds go silent. And no matter what he rolls on the roll, he doesn't hear anything. The apocalypse is no longer telling him what is coming, and that could be a big deal for that character. The next one is demonstrate one of their thing's bad sides. This is, a classic example from Dungeon World. There is an immolator class, or also wizards. The immolator throws around fireballs, or throws around a lot of fire. I have no doubt in my mind that I'm sure normal wizards can throw around fireballs or something close to it. Fire is dangerous. Fire is unpredictable. You might have thrown a fireball thinking that you were attacking the enemy, and instead you set the town on fire. Like, oh, whoops. Yeah, I guess that is a downside to it. I mean, it gets progressively. I would say the more impactful one of their things is, the worse the bad side demonstrated should be. I think that's fair to say. Um, Currently in my Dungeon World game that I'm playing in, we have two characters that have the ability to cast the cleric spell Guidance. Um, One of those is an actual cleric of a dwarven rock god, and his guidance is fairly tame. Um, it it helps us. It's helped us out with small things and whatnot. My character is the other one, and my character worships the sun and the moon, which have been established to be pretty bad things in this universe. Um, and I've used the spell to potentially cause a apocalypse myself on accident. Um, so that's a move that has a wide range of applicability, and so I asked my deities for guidance. The guidance received, I rolled. If I remember right, I rolled pretty poorly as well. Um, so the guidance received is not necessarily um, good for me or the people around me, and that's definitely one of the bad sides of the stuff that I was doing. The next is give them a difficult decision to make. Um, I think this is similar to put someone in a high stakes situation, um, and goes back to some of the principles we were talking about and the agendas. If you don't have to ever make any difficult decisions for your character, you'll have a little bit of fun, but I don't think you'll ever. It won't be a character that you ever really remember super fondly. Like you'll never come back to. Obviously, I'm saying never. It's possible. I can always be wrong. But I think being faced with difficult decisions to make will lead to um, more fun in the end and um, more memorable character experiences. Um, Now, make sure that you've talked with your group to determine where the line is for difficult decisions. Um, you know, for some groups, a difficult decision to make that is okay in that group would be, do you let this dude rape a woman or rape a character, an NPC? Because if you were to step in to stop it, you might get hurt, um, fatally so. Like a group of NPCs trying to rape someone. Like that's okay with some groups. It is definitely not okay with others. That's a thing that needs to be discussed in group, and I can never praise enough of the idea of a session zero, so that everyone comes in to the game um, understanding where everyone else sits with what they're comfortable with playing. and what they're expecting out of the game. There are a whole host of um, terrible horror stories you can find online about people that showed up to a game, um, were not told anything about the group, were not really told a lot about the DM style, and then found a vastly incompatible group and play style than what they were expecting. So when giving them difficult decisions to make, you know, at some point you you have that scale of a difficult decision to make is what does my character eat for lunch? And on the other end, you have much harder, darker, difficult decisions that you give characters, and you just need to make sure that everyone is on board with the level, um, with the relative level that everyone is comfortable with for difficult decisions. Um, the next move, tell them the possible consequences and ask. Um, I am trying to think if I've used this in Dungeons and Dragons before. I can't remember. Um, but this is a good way of putting something out there, um, or maybe not even putting something out there, and having a character say, I'm going to do X to this thing, or I'm going to do X here. And you know doing X to that thing or in this place is a terrible idea and no one will take it well. Um, you you may have experienced in Dungeons and Dragons when someone says they want to do something, and then the dungeon master looks at them and goes, "Are you sure, or do you?" Because that's the second part of this move. And ask, "Are you sure you want to do this thing?" The first part that didn't happen there is tell them the possible consequences. You may have hinted at it, but you may probably didn't outright tell them what was going to happen. Um, so this move helps alleviate um, that problem a little bit. This move can also be used in the context of um, movers and shakers in the world, where they're in a superior position of power to the players, and they tell them something like, well, you can fight us, and you might win right now, but we're going to come back later with more people, more resources, and just steamroll you. Or you can give us this thing, or you can pay us off, or you can give us this person that we're after, that you're harboring. Something like that. You let them know what this faction will do if their demands aren't met, and then you ask the players what will they do if they will meet those demands or not. Um, the next one, turn their move back on them. Uh, like earlier said, fireballs. You threw a fireball. You're in an enclosed wooden building with locked doors and no windows. Oh shit, this sucks to be you, man. Stuff like that. Next is make a move from one of your dangers, bigger pictures, or fronts. I refer to these as fronts and portfolios. These are all pretty much the same thing on various scales. Um, they're just a collection of NPCs, um, threats and motivations and resources on varying scales between local to regional to national, if you want to get that big. Next is introduce a new barrier to carrying on. Sometimes it is interesting to have them go into this place and find out that part of it is collapsed. And now they need to figure out a way around it. Or they need to figure out a plan, because if they just pull out all the rubble, more of the building might collapse, Um, it might force them to go into a more dangerous route or choose between a couple dangerous routes, because the safe route has become no longer usable. And that doesn't necessarily need to be a literal barrier of stuff filling a room or filling a hallway or passage or something. It could also be um, one of those off-screen badnesses, or like a collection of heavily armed enemies, or a like just a big enough group of enemies that they're not really sure if they can take those on. Um, and then the last bit. This is a really important to a big R reward. Reveal a fundamental scarcity. In the Mad Max universe, that becomes water. In other post-apocalypse universes, that might be food. That might be um, bullets. It might be gasoline. It might be technology or batteries, or all sorts of things could become a fundamental scarcity in your world. But what you should do is, before you try to use this move, you should think about how this thing being a scarcity affects your world, so that it actually feels like a fundamental scarcity that they came across, and not just um, and not just a reward that falls flat. Okay, and now we're going to go into trust, and we're going to go over a basic collection of the archetypes. None of them have extremely detailed skills yet, but we'll go over that in future streams as we detail them. But the big thing here is trust, also called the relationship mechanic from Simple World. Um, this is something that I think you either need to play with or play without. And I think if you play with it, everyone at the table needs to be cool with it. This is along the lines of determining how difficult of a decision is it okay to ask your players to make. Um, Playing with trust in the group is also a decision that needs to be talked about beforehand. Um, as an aspect that needs to be talked about beforehand. Um, so, at the end of each session, each player gets to adjust one PC score of trust up or down by one. Whenever a character triggers a PC's flag, and these are things that will go into more depth um, in the future, because I haven't fully transcribed everything here, which is why I have put it on the block of streams to do. Whenever a character triggers a PC's flag, the PC can adjust their score for that character up or down by one. Characters can betray one another for a +2 bonus to a roll, but their score goes down by 1. Characters can make meaningful sacrifices for someone and their relationship score go toward that person will go up by 1. And this will tie into the PC move later on, help/hinder. It's two moves that are fundamentally the same thing, but one is in reverse. Um, when you roll the help, you roll using your trust score with that character. So if you have a negative trust score with somebody, because your character doesn't trust them at all, then you might be rolling 2d6 minus something um, to help that character do a thing. I mean, there could be reasons that you want to do that. Specifically, it's in your character's best interest right now to help the person regardless of whether or not you like them. But when you roll to hinder somebody, you roll minus your trust because you've grown closer and you trust that person. It becomes harder mentally for you. This is more of the emotional headspace struggle than it is about physically helping somebody. This is how much your character is willing to put into helping or hindering somebody. Because if you're going to hinder somebody and you don't trust them, it will be easier. Theoretically, it should be easier for you to hinder them than it is to help them. That's the logic we're going off based here. So a hinder roll of 2d6 minus trust. If you have like a -2 trust with somebody, then you're going to be adding 2 because the two negatives make that a positive. When you subtract a negative, math becomes positive. So we're not going to do anything crazy with math, but it's just one of those things that you have to keep in mind of help hindrance. There will be some classes, or there will be a class that gets a bonus out of betraying another character. There might be another class that gains a bonus out of helping the character. They're more efficient at helping the character when they, when they help someone, they might get a bigger bonus for it, or that person might get a bigger bonus out of it. Okay, and now we're just going to go down to the archetypes, or the character classes. First we have the Wanderer. He's kind of a, lone person. Big aspects are going to be navigation. I thought it'd be interesting to give him song to help keep him self-sane while out on the road wandering by himself. And a dog companion that we've nicknamed Dog Meat because we thought it was entertaining. I had help with this part with a friend of mine who is the person that leads the Dungeonworld campaign. The next is the Shank. Big ups and scavenging, use of traps, maybe. This is the class that will most likely get the bonus to betraying another character, because the idea here is you are a rogue, you are a Shank, you go in, you're about self-preservation, and the way that you have preserved yourself so far is by using others and taking stuff. Next is Leader. I'm thinking these are going to be the characters that will be. Oh, whoops. It's not what I wanted. These are going to be the characters that are going to be better at talking to people, resolving conflicts through word rather than force. Um, will probably be morale healers, keeping people together, keeping groups together, that kind of thing. And then Sawbones is going to be the medic type class. They're going to be all about literally healing characters. Maybe a big deal with them is they're going to be able to um, help people get rid of um, consequences, kind of stealing mechanic from Fate here, like broken limbs, diseases, stuff like that. Next is Gearhead. It's going to be the tech-based class. Don't have a lot of ideas for it so far, but we can go into that when we get there. We can help determine its role. Then Madman. This is um, another class that is based around the social side of the game. They might be able to, freak people out in the middle of combat, um, help this is the character that will be like the most weirdness. Apocalypse World, the game that the system is based off of, has a lot of weirdness in there. Literally, one of the stats is called weird, and I don't want this to go to the level that Apocalypse World is weird at, but we still want there to be a character who you're not quite sure if this guy is just insane or if he really has some weird power granted to him by the apocalypse. This next one is just Gunslinger. Classic archetype, a little bit of a Western feel to it. Dude with guns, he's good at guns. And then the last is Brick. The character idea for this is the melee big brick shit house of a character made of muscle and sweat and blood, and he will be good. He'll probably get bonuses to intimidation based off of um, let's see, probably his vehemence instead of his personality. Um, Probably turn into a character that rushes in and is the distraction around which the rest of the team works in combat. Very much so the combat character, very much not so a thinking strategic character. It might be that we give it options to play like that, but its main goal is to be a beefy tank guy that just hits real hard in melee. Alright, well, that concludes the first overall just breakdown of this project and what we have so far. Thank you for the watch. It has been a bit long-winded. Um, Sorry for how long it took. And if you have any questions or comments or thoughts, just leave them here for me. If you can think up some cool abilities that these guys might have, that these character archetypes might have, give me a heads up, and I can, write it down and bookmark it for later when we go through those specific streams for those characters. So thank you very much one last time, and have a great day.